Hello everybody. Well, Japanese stilt grass has been an invasive species for decades through mid-Atlantic Appalachia. Been here for a really long time. Many biologists say it's destroying the natural habitat in the Appalachian hardwood forest and other areas, but does it have any value and can it be stopped? Well, we have tons of it here at Red Tool House, so let me introduce you to stilt grass if you're not familiar. And then I will show you how we are dealing with it in our own way, I guess. So come along. This will be interesting, hopefully. So probably 80 to 90% of the ground cover you see here around me as we pan around all the way here. This area where we did some dozer and excavator work several years ago, excavator work last year. 80 to 90% of that ground cover is Japanese stilt grass. Its biological name is Microstegium viminium, and it also goes by the name of Nepalese brown top. It's a native to Southeast Asia. So, of course, like anything with globalization, how did it get here? Well, it got here by accident. Well, supposedly it ended up in Tennessee in 1919. That's where they first saw it growing, and estimated that it was because during that time there was a lot of exports from China of different porcelain and those type of goods, and they used the stilt grass as packing material to keep the china from breaking, of course, as they were shipping it across the Pacific Ocean. So it comes to Tennessee, ends up getting dumped out on the ground there and takes off. And here you've got, what, 100 years later, it's now spread through 20-some states. I'll show you a map here. This is what Forestry Service says, areas that have reported stilt grass. So you can see it's pretty comprehensive coverage out of that Tennessee area, and all 55 states and West Virginia are showing that it is present. So why is it so prevalent in those states, or especially in the Appalachian region? Why does it thrive so well? You can see behind me here, this is the boat meadow. You may be wondering, Troy, how did that meadow get its name? Well, it's just something we pulled out of the air. So here at the boat meadow, you can see basically everything behind me is stilt grass in this clearing. And this at one time was actually some pretty nice orchard grass, but with the pigs and of course the invasive species, it's turned over into stilt grass. So why does it do so well and beat out the other native grasses? Well, probably the first and most obvious reason is this grass really thrives in the shade. It is extremely shade tolerant. Now I'm standing here on the north side of our south ridge, and already at this time of year you don't get any direct sunlight on this spot. Now stilt grass is an annual, so it does die out every year, and it actually just comes back from seeds, but even with that it is extremely prolific in this shade area. So in this area here where it's pretty shady and never had anything be able to grow under a beech and multiple oaks, the stilt grass is starting to carry over in it. Now again, now that it's October, it's starting to die back, but it does really, really well in the shade. Well, another obvious reason why it does so well is, of course, what you see here. This is the seed head of just one of the stalks of one plant. So with multiple seed heads, it's reported that one plant can produce as many as 1,000 seeds in one season. So obviously that's a lot of seeds from one plant. And these seeds are so small that they travel well on animal fur, wind, water. They can get transplanted very easily. So that makes them very prolific. Another reason is these can actually root at each node. And you're saying, Troy, I'm not sure you know what you're talking about. Well, let me put it against my black shirt here. So if you see each little knuckle or joint, it's kind of like bamboo. There's a node at each one of those knuckles. And if any of those would come in contact with the soil and to be able to make contact, like ground contact, be slightly buried, then they can actually take root there. So that's where one of those situations, like if you use a string trimmer or a bush hog or something like that, you're not only going to pick up the seeds and fling them everywhere, but even the bits that you cut with your trimmer or your mower could possibly toss it over into bare ground and, of course, allow it to take root. So even though it's an annual, those seed heads can survive on the ground or in the ground for up to 5 years. So even if you're able to eradicate all the plants, then you could have a 5-year seed bank easily that can come back. Now, it also is very tolerant of a wide variety of pH. So soil pH, it can handle that eclectic swing depending on the type of soil you run into. Obviously under a pine canopy, in a hardwood forest, out in an open clay field, all those type of things. It can handle that pH swing really, really well. But it really does great in disturbed soils. Anywhere soil's been uprooted, turned over, churned, which pig pasture, of course, you're going to see a lot of that. Interestingly enough, behind me here, you can kind of see, it should be pretty obvious in this shot, where the stilt grass is still being fed by the warm spring water coming out of the ground. And so it hasn't dried out, nor has it experienced the harsher cold temperatures we've had already. So it's interesting, you kind of see the water line right here behind me where the stilt grass flourishes downhill of the spring. Now supposedly stilt grass can actually do well in undisturbed soils, and I could take you all over the farm now and show you in places where we don't run pigs, where the stilt grass is thriving on the forest floor, even with a tightly closed canopy. It's like all it needs is just a little cat's whisker of sunlight, and poof, it's on. Grows like crazy. Now you may be able to argue, well, maybe that was because you timbered the place 20 years ago, Troy, and every inch of soil on your property was disturbed. That could be a fair argument, but from what I'm reading from the U.S. Forestry Service, that stilt grass has such a wide variety of environmental conditions it can handle that it doesn't always have to be disturbed. So it's not like I'm causing my own issues. Obviously, I am causing a lot of my own issues, and not just talking about grass either. But it's going to spread in our forests even if we leave them completely alone. This has really become an issue for the Forestry Service in national parks and national forests where they want to try to maintain the ecosystem, the native ecosystem. So what makes this grass the bad boy of the forest floor? Why isn't it just a live and let live type situation according to the Forestry Service? Well, actually what happens, since it can grow in dense forested areas, it takes hold before other grasses are able to take hold. But the other issue is it can grow up to 3 feet tall and it forms a very dense mat. So the Forestry Service says that this is actually destroying the ecosystem of a lot of the ground birds, like the bobwhite quail, for example. It's just too tall and too matted for them to be able to nest and to maneuver and to do whatever they do on the ground when they're hanging out in the forest. So it's destroying that habitat and causing that to be a major issue. So in the fall, when you get the first frost on or you get the dry season coming, it dies out, since it is an annual, but since it's so thick, it leaves this thick brown mat in the forest that, again, can hinder woodland creatures and also can become a fire hazard as it's dry and very flammable. The one thing I found very interesting and can actually confirm that that's the situation here at our place is white-tailed deer and other wild ruminants don't seem to eat it. There must be something flavor-ish or nutritional value-ish that just doesn't resonate with them. They just completely stay away from it. So the problem with that naturally is that if the deer aren't eating it and it's already fighting the existing native grasses, the deer are going to come by and actually help the stilt grass move on because they're going to choose the more succulent stuff that they like, the native stuff. And where that void is, of course, the stilt grass is going to fill it in. So whitetail are actually helping the stilt grass be more prolific in specific areas. So what are the Forestry Service's recommendations on eradicating stilt grass? Well, interestingly enough, they don't suggest that chemical means are the best. Now, are one option, they say, but most of the chemical means you need to destroy stilt grass are pretty indiscriminate. So you can imagine they're not going to highly recommend going into the forest, the Appalachian hardwood forest, with a bunch of hardcore herbicides and just spraying everything at random. You're going to take the good stuff with the bad stuff. So not the easiest thing to do. From some of the articles I read, and I'm going to link to a pretty comprehensive Forestry Service article that goes into all these details. This is where I'm pulling my stats from. That what they're doing in national parks and national forests, they're actually using volunteer base to go in and hand remove the stilt grass at a certain time of year, so prior to where we are right now, before the seed heads form, but later in the summer, when the grass doesn't have a chance to grow back that season. So imagine, you know, it's matured, it's about to develop the seed heads, you come through, you jerk all of it out. Any of the seed bank in the ground that starts to take off, it doesn't have enough of a season left to be able to thrive. So the frost kills it out before it can grow back up and germinate. So you're trying to eliminate that cycle of regeneration. Now again, with one stalk producing as many as 1,000 seeds, you may be punching yourself in the face or trying to bail out the ocean with a thimble. But there really aren't any clean ways of eradicating it that the Forestry Service recommends. There's no surefire way to do it other than by hand. And who's going to go on 100 acres in my small tract of land? It's not like I've got time to go on 100 acres and start hand jerking weeds. The good thing is they are shallow rooted, so they are easy to uproot. It's just the sheer volume that you're dealing with makes that process seem a little daunting and unrealistic. So why do I even bring this up on our homesteading channel? Well, it's interesting. Obviously, we're saturated in it. I have it everywhere. And to be honest with you, I wasn't even sure what it was. It hadn't even really crossed my mind. Ooh, that's a hot spot. Hadn't really crossed my mind until one of you guys watched and said, wow, Troy, you've got a lot of stilt grass in your pig pasture. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll have to look into that. Well, so this last week, spending time in the woods, running the excavator and all the stuff we're doing for the retreat, I got to see just how much stilt grass there was. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, now it's top of mind. You guys pointed it out. And now look at it, wow, there's a lot of that. So I decided, let's do a little research on it and see what's going on. Hence the video. But the other shoe that's got to drop on this is, so what do I do about it? How do I manage it? Well, as you can guess, I don't really do anything with it, but I do want to show you this. Stilt grass, every bit of that, pig pasture. Stilt grass, pig pasture. My pigs absolutely love stilt grass. It doesn't really slow them down at all. In fact, they kind of seek it out, I've noticed. So I'm right now standing where in about, well, I measured it off one time. I keep changing the size. But let's say it's about 1.5 acre pasture for my 3 sows. So just 3 sows are keeping it eaten down like this. So they're eradicating a lot of this stilt grass within the pasture. But I'm going to go over here to where the 11 piglets are on my eastern pasture. And I want to show you that because that's really interesting. Okay, so this is the demarcation line. This is the divider fence between the sow's pasture and the easternmost pasture that the piglets are in. They're right now in the farrowing barn, which is behind us here. So the farrowing barn splits it as well. So this was more dense and green than this was because we've punched a hole in the canopy. Took out a couple beech trees that were taking up a lot of the canopy space so we could get some sunlight in here. But come look at the details of what they've done. So just several months ago, this was all knee-high stilt grass. You can see here against this red maple where there's a little bit that they haven't eaten yet. So it gives you an idea how deep it was. But it is absolutely obliterated. Very, very few seed heads that I see. What they've trampled down, it seems to have killed it. Obviously they're eating it as well. So they're really helping curb the seed production or the expansion of the stilt grass. Now granted, as we mentioned, there's 5 years of seed heads in here, so it's not like I'm rid of it in this spot. If I leave them in here all winter, which is not the plan, but if I leave them in here all winter, that was a big pile of pig poop I just stepped in. Woo, it's slick, taking me downhill. Then they would actually come through and uproot the rest of this. Get every last bit of this out. Eat the roots, eat the remaining nodes, stalks, all those type of things. And granted, I would obviously be introducing an opportunity for a lot of erosion, but I think pigs could possibly be a solution for curbing and possibly even challenging completely stilt grass. Now the real test would be to come back in the spring and get a shade-loving pasture grass that could beat out the stilt grass. So in all my research, there's one interesting natural enemy to stilt grass, other than my pigs, and that is direct sunlight or open sunlight. So in my big pastures, what I call big, you flatlanders would laugh, but in my main pastures down in the meadow there, where I have a lot of sunlight throughout the day, no forced canopy dappling the sunlight or blocking the sunlight, there's just no stilt grass. Any that tries to flourish gets choked out pretty quickly by the other pasture grasses that are taken off and more established. So if I was really going to take this head on, I think my strategy would be to open more canopy. You know, we want silvopasture here, so I don't want to make it a wide open spot, but find that balance of more canopy opened and pigs coming through and maybe being a little more aggressive with allowing them to graze down specific times of year, maybe getting in front of seed production, and then coming back and heavily sowing a pasture grass that would be more prolific and could possibly beat out the orchard grass. Now, am I onto some revelation that nobody else has thought about? I can't imagine that I am. I'm not the first dummy to raise pigs in the woods in Appalachia, and stilt grass has been around for 100 years. So I think somebody's drawn that conclusion. But interestingly enough, I cannot find any data whatsoever on pastured piggery and stilt grass. There's just no study out there that I can find online that makes any connection or even discusses what we're talking about today. So if other people have found out about it, they're not talking about it a lot. Now, is it a viable option? Are you going to release pigs into the national forest? No. We know what happens when you do that. Then we have feral pig problems. But I find it really interesting to take on something as invasive as it is, as destructive supposedly it is, that they haven't found any natural means. They haven't discussed it. And here I'm seeing domesticated pigs take care of it really, really well. Along those same lines, there's no nutritional value studies that I can find. So since deer don't eat it, and they assume other ruminants don't eat it, I guess, that nobody's taken the time to actually do any study to see, is there a protein load? Is it high in carbohydrates? What are the values of this grass? I'd be curious to see, is there anything in Southeast Asia that eats it? Is there a yak? Is there a native ruminant over there that eats it? And then be able to draw some conclusions from that. But I have not seen any ill effects from my pigs eating it. It seems to be the same no matter what, whether it's any other grasses. There's just no evidence of it being detrimental to their diet. Now I've discovered, and this is where I've got to figure out that balance, I've discovered that even when stilt grass dies, the root system still maintains some rigidity and holds on to soil. So where I have stilt grass growing on a steep slope, even though it dies out in the winter, I don't get erosion in those areas. I don't have to worry about soil loss because those roots, even though they're super thin or super shallow, they seem to be a thick mat on the surface and take care of any groundwater that's going to cut away. Now granted, if we had a huge flood, some frog choker coming off the mountain, then that would probably take it out. But I've really been happy with how it actually helps control or combat erosion concerns that I have. So you can kind of see there's a challenge there, there's a rub. If I let the pigs eat all of this out, then I can maybe start curbing the stilt grass, but I can promote a lot more erosion, which is the last thing I want to do here on the property. You know, that's West Virginia's challenge all the time. It's so steep, and it's all red clay, that it all likes to head south every time it rains. So what I'd like is, if you all have had an experience with stilt grass, if you've done any research, if you've had a challenge with it with your pasture operation, or your landscaping or anything else, comment below. I'd like to get a dialogue going here of how people have dealt with stilt grass, if they've managed it, how they've controlled it, or if they've just thrown their hands in the air and said, forget it, just let it have everything. Well, I hope you all found this interesting. I think it's fun to look at something in a different light that I've been looking at ever since I was a kid and never really knew what it was. So I appreciate your all's comments and appreciate you kind of stirring up a topic there. All right, take care, everybody.